All right, we are live for anyone watching this. Hello, welcome. I wanted to do this because this is going to air on the podcast a little later. But for those of you who are watching it live, I'm excited to have this conversation. And if you have any questions while you are watching this, fantastic. Ask them in the YouTube comment thread, and I'll bring them up as we are going along. So, Kristi Burke is an ex-evangelical Christian who began deconstructing her faith at 19. I love her YouTube videos because they are personal and they discuss not just her personal journey while discussing, her insight and offering solidarity and encouragement. But I also appreciate that she's been making more videos about Christian nationalism and authoritarianism. There are very few YouTubers whose videos I really want to watch as soon as they come out, and Kristi is one of them. And I wanted to talk to her about her own history, her YouTube experience, and frankly, being a woman in this space that has been dominated by men for a really long time, especially in the non-theistic world. So I'm super excited that she could join me. Hi, Kristi. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How about you?
I'm fantastic. So, for people who are not familiar with you, first of all, tell us your YouTube channel, and then I would love to know how you even got into doing YouTube and how you began talking about any of this stuff.
Well, my YouTube channel is Jezebel Vibes. I actually recently underwent a name change to the channel. It was just my full name, but I have been Jezebel Vibes pretty much since I was doing TikTok before I ever got on YouTube. And the reason I started on TikTok was because I had been wanting to make content, kind of about my journey and in the deconstruction scene. It's when the deconstruction scene really kind of blew up. And I remember I was scrolling through Facebook and I saw somebody post. Some repost about how it's okay to be an atheist. It's okay if you don't believe in God, but you don't need to be telling people about it, and you don't need to be putting down other people's religion. And it was just this whole post about how atheists can be atheists, but they must be quiet about it, and it was disrespectful to be vocal about it. And I didn't like that. It just like kind of struck a nerve. And so I got on TikTok. I'd been primarily lurking, and I made my first video, and it was about that. And it was about how I felt like religious ideologies are often protected, but they are beliefs, and like any belief, I think that they should be carefully and critically examined and scrutinized, so that they are not you're not holding beliefs that aren't true, especially beliefs that can cause harm. And that is what prompted me. That was my first video, and it got a lot more views than I anticipated for having never posted on TikTok before. And from there, I just kept making content. It was mainly just deconstruction content for a couple years until I moved over to YouTube and started making fuller length videos.
So, where were you in your personal journey when you start thinking, I want to talk about this on TikTok? I don't want to be silent about this. Why should I keep my mouth shut about this? Like, were you at the point where you're like, yeah, I'm absolutely an atheist, or are you still questioning things? And I'm not sure I know exactly how deep your religious background was at the time.
Well, at the time, I was very much deconstructed, very much an atheist, and very confident in it. That was in 2021. And I had been out of the church since I was 19. I started really questioning things when I was about 17, but I was very deep in my religious indoctrination. I was born and raised in the Southern Baptist Church, and I wanted to live my life for Jesus. I went on mission trips and would go hand out tracts at the mall and try to witness to people in public. So I was very deep in it. And when I was 17, I just kind of went through a transformation in my own personal journey. Basically, I got to the point where I didn't really know what I believed about God, who God was, his characteristics. I had, kind of one version of Christianity that was the Calvinistic view where it's like God predestines everyone, chooses who goes to hell and who doesn't, and there's really not much you can do about it. And then there's the other version that I was getting that was like God loves you and he wants a relationship with everyone, and each individual is special. And so I just struggled with that a lot, and I went through a couple years of trying to figure out what I believed until I was probably about, I don't know, 2021, and I realized I don't think I believe any of this anymore.
So a lot of that, I mean, that is not different from my own journey, but I'm
Mhm.
curious because I'm old. When I did it, I went through it very internally. There were not a lot of resources for me at the time, but what you're describing sounds a lot like the sort of person who would go into, well, what happens if I don't believe in God? Let me read apologetics, counter apologetic books, and there are more of those today. But I'm
Mhm.
kind of curious if how much politics weighed into any of this, or if it wasn't. Because I know for me, it wasn't a political thing. It was just something I've
Mhm.
kind of figured out on my own. But I wonder that if it happened today, how much of it would be tied into what's happening more broadly.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are kind of waking up in their churches, seeing what's happening and seeing what their fellow church members are supporting in the political sphere. For me, there were no politics involved at all, and in fact, I maintained some of my more conservative politics for a little while, even after I left the church, because I just went through kind of a period of being very confused, and all I really knew is that I had no idea who God was, and I wasn't getting any answers when I asked. So I lost my faith in God, but I was kind of in this limbo. I was kind of searching for something to believe in. I thought I had to find God. It was like a requirement of existence. And so I kind of went through like some new age beliefs and just some kind of light spirituality before I just kind of resolved myself to being an atheist. But it was probably a good year or two after I realized I was an atheist that I started really shifting my politics and like my views on abortion. That was a really big one. I was pro life for even a couple of years
Let's
after
talk about
I
that one for a
changed my
second.
mind. Yeah.
I want to spend time on that. Tell
Yeah.
me, I actually totally get how you could go from questioning God to becoming an atheist, even when you're coming from like a Southern Baptist background. Tell me how you go from being super anti-abortion to not, because that seems much harder for me.
Yeah, no, that was very difficult because a lot of people think that when you leave the church, it's like you change everything about your belief system. Everything changes, and for me, it wasn't like I was seeking out a new worldview. It happened to me, by accident, really, and really because I was seeking out what was true and not finding it. When it came to the abortion issue, I used to be very anti-abortion in my religious years. uh, I'm pretty embarrassed about it actually, but I'm very open about it. I used to walk around in a shirt that literally said abortion is murder, which kind of like, oh, it gives me a little kind of sickening feeling in my stomach now. But I just believed, what many conservative Christians believe, that that's a life and you're murdering it. And I didn't have all of the information about what women go through, why women get abortions, when most women are getting abortions, and the life stages and all of that. And so it took some time, but I think what really it came down to me was autonomy. I just realized that bodily autonomy was a really important thing, and that probably just tied into my deconstruction of freedom and like wanting personal freedom and the freedom to think and the freedom to be. And I just got to a point where I realized that a woman, all people should have bodily autonomy. And if only women don't have bodily autonomy, then I think that there is an issue going on. There's some sort of a discrepancy. And it
Even
took
in
a
the
while, but
even among Southern Baptists, really, so much of that theology is built on forget abortion. It's women don't have control over their own selves, and the men control that.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, growing up as a woman in the church, you don't really feel like your body is your own, your mind is your own, your future is your own. It's all kind of in the hands of either God or your future husband, and that's kind of it. So yeah, breaking free from that is definitely really difficult.
How long did that process take you? Was it all at once, or I mean, I assume it's gradual at some point, but are we talking the span of a couple of years then altogether, where you go from
Definitely.
confident in God to confident in being an atheist?
Yeah, I'd say when I was 16, I thought I knew it all. I thought I was like, I've got the Bible, I've got all of my courses and my Bible study tools, and I know God and I know the Bible and I have a relationship with Him. And then when I was 17, that's when I was introduced to Calvinism for the first time ever. Even though I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, I think there wasn't a lot that they touched on within the whole predestination thing.
Can you
And
explain that? What's the
yeah,
difference between the two worldviews there?
so basically, Calvinism is the idea. I mean, it's kind of a whole theology, but boiled down, it's that God created everything with foreknowledge. He creates every person with determination of who that person will become and where that person will go, and that it is not up to the individual to ask for forgiveness and to be saved, but it is up to God to call them to that. And if you're not called, well, you're not going to be saved. And I was not raised that way. I was raised to believe that Jesus loves everyone, that every single person is called to be saved, and that God wants to, save us all. And that's the point of mission work. And that's why I did mission work, because in my mind, there are all these people all over the world that are going to hell and they could die tomorrow and end up there. And I wanted to save them. I wanted to help as many people escape that fate as possible. And so when I learned about this idea of predestination, I was introduced to a passage in Romans where it talks about the potter and the clay, and how, how who are you to question God? He is your maker. He determines all, and it very much is a strong case for predetermination. And then I got to a point where I was like, well, if I believe that God is all powerful, God knows everything before it happens, and everything goes according to His will anyway, then it only makes sense that God is going to create someone knowing that they will or will not end up in hell, and that He will create people specifically to go to hell. And that really just kind of shifted my entire perspective of God, because to me, He was a loving Father who just wanted nothing more than to share a relationship with me and all people. But that wasn't compatible with a God who intentionally creates people, who punishes them in the most severe way possible just for not believing in Him, not getting the right information, not following the right religion. And so I couldn't justify that. And I could no longer look at God as the sweet, loving Father God. I had to really shift my idea of who God was. And that was the breaking point of my faith, because my entire faith was wrapped up in my relationship with this deity that I thought that I knew, and then I was realizing I didn't know it all.
You logicked yourself out of a John MacArthur entire sermon series
I
right there.
loved John MacArthur. I had all his study books.
At what point do you go? I mean, I've watched a bunch of your YouTube videos since you started doing it, and you spent a lot of time talking about, yes, problems with the Bible. Here's why I don't believe this stuff makes sense. And more recently, you've kind of shifted. I don't know if it's consciously or not, but you spend more time talking about the implications of Christianity, Christian nationalism, and how that's problematic. I'm wondering what made you. I'm not saying, oh, you're never going to talk about that old stuff again, but I know personally, I don't make that sort of content much either, because I feel like the implications are more important to me than proving to people why God doesn't exist or anything like that. I don't know if that's what your mentality is these days, or you just found this new passion for talking about something that feels more local, feels more personal, something like that.
Well, I think I always knew when I started creating content, especially when I switched over to YouTube, I always knew that I had this kind of underlying goal of helping a lot of people break free from this very oppressive ideology, because the more people who hold this oppressive ideology, the worse our society will get, and the easier it is for these ideologies to, work their way into our government and to be used. For as tools of oppression, and so I always knew that that was my goal, and that's what I wanted to accomplish, was to help people escape this, especially people who were just scared or confused, and they needed that extra push or encouragement to walk away. But I never got political, because I knew that I wanted to reach as many people as possible, and that I could possibly alienate people if I shared a political opinion. And so I just kept it very neutral because I also knew that a lot of people I was reaching were people still in very conservative communities and churches. So I didn't want to alienate those people, but I always held very true to my beliefs. And I feel like I always made it clear that most of my content revolved around this kind of conservative evangelical version of Christianity. And I would talk about it, being in our government, things like that. But when the election happened, I felt like a darkness kind of setting in, like a lot of us did, and I knew that, things were gonna get a lot worse, and I started becoming very fearful of the future, and I just knew that I had a platform and I had a voice that a lot of people listen to, not just ex-Christians and atheists, but Christians too, and I just felt like I had to talk about what's happening because to me it was just a more pressing matter. And so yeah, I mean, it was hard for me because I thought, okay, well, I'm probably gonna piss off a lot of people. I don't know how my audience will take it. Apparently, a lot of my audience assumed I was not like on the left or I didn't have progressive views. I'm not really sure why they thought that. So it did upset some people, but overall the response was very positive, and I just felt like it was just the right thing to do. It just felt like I needed to shift and pivot and talk about these issues that I feel like I've always been leading up to, and now they're here. So we need to really, really talk about them.
This may be a little tangential, but I wonder if you've had this thought too. Maybe 20 years ago, when those new atheist books were coming out, whatever criticisms I may have of some of those authors and stuff, they had to take a very superficial level. Here's why God doesn't exist. Here's why religion is untrue. And you can't get too in depth about it because the book can only be so long. And so it was opening itself to criticism because they can't speak to all people. They're taking a very
Mhm.
cursory look at Christianity almost entirely, and that concept of God, the most popular version of it, whatever. What I have come to really appreciate about TikTok, especially, but YouTube and all the other platforms, podcasts as well, is I have seen more people talking about their personal experience, how it plays out, what they went through, their deconstruction journey. And maybe a whole bunch of those people, I have no clue what they're talking about. To hear a Jehovah's Witness, former Jehovah's Witness, talk about what they went through, or someone who was a preacher's kid, or, name your minority religion and what they went through to get here. And it's like, you know what? I don't know what you're talking about. But the amazing thing is, I know people who watch that, who understand the lingo and who know what you've been through because they've been through it too, and you're going to connect with that person way more than you would someone like Richard Dawkins or any of the new atheist authors. And I feel like what you're describing too is, let me just talk about my journey, and who knows what will happen. And what you have found is that people are drawn to it because a lot
Mhm.
of people can relate to what you've been through in a way that feels personal and is honest. And it's just not something some of the more famous atheists that people have come to know, broadly speaking, can talk about because, I don't know, they've been atheists most of their life. They don't know what it's like these days. They did not grow up in purity culture. They haven't dealt with that stuff. And so that actually connects way more than a lot of the more famous atheists. And I don't know
Mhm.
if you have noticed that, if people have talked to you about that in comment threads, in messages you've gotten.
Well, I think there's a very big difference. The shift I see, and you can tell me what you think, is
Yeah.
that when I was deconstructing 15 years ago or whenever it was, yeah, it was like Richard Dawkins. There was a lot of those, there was the atheist experience and all of that. And I feel like a lot of that was very much rooted in like intellectualism. It's like this is an intellectual argument. We're using our brain and our logic here. So we got to use these logical arguments to tell you why this is wrong. And the new way seems to be a lot more rooted in our emotions and how we feel and our stories and our experiences. And I think that for a long time for me, I was very wrapped up in the intellectual, atheism. But then I realized at some point that the two, we need a balance between the two. We can't just be all intellectual. Here's why God doesn't exist. We can't just solely rely on our emotions because that's how people get trapped into religion. So I think finding that balance between logic, reason, rationality, but also something that's really been big for me on my channel is not telling people, hey, this is why this is wrong. This is why you shouldn't believe in this. It's more so, hey, this is what you're being taught. This is what they're saying. But does it make sense? Does it feel right? Does it sit right with your intuition and your sensibilities? And I think finding ways to bring those two together, getting people to think critically, but also checking in with themselves and saying, hey, does this even feel right? I think that's a really important part of deconstruction, questioning critical thinking that was missing before, is not giving people room to think about stories and feelings and emotions.
Yeah, it's very much gone from academia, which again has its place. I'm all for
Yeah,
those debates and stuff. But I mean, if there's one thing pastors know how to do really well, it's that they are not spending week after week making intellectual arguments for why
exactly.
God exists. They're telling you the emotional stories.
Yep,
And
pulling
it
the
is,
heartstrings.
yeah, and it works. And they're
Yeah.
really good at it. Some of them are very, very
Mhm.
good at that. And this is a reason I really appreciate when people are saying, look, this is what I went through. This is why I didn't enjoy spending time getting grilled about my personal life, which happens in some certain instances. Or here's how I was judged. Here's how I was restricted. It's like, yeah, that
Mhm.
is not rock solid proof of why the religion is wrong. But you're right. It doesn't pass the smell test of like, does it fit with your worldview these days? Does it make sense in any sort of meaningful way, even if it may not fit
Mhm.
some logic puzzle or anything like that?
Yeah, well, religion and spirituality, it's funny because Christians kind of participate in this too. I've noticed, like apologists, when we kind of go back and forth, they want me to provide an intellectual, logical reason that I am not a Christian. And if I can't do that, well, I'm wrong. But then they also are the same ones who claim Christianity is a personal relationship with Jesus, and when you're saved, you just know it and you just feel and hear his voice. And so,
And if you don't
it's
have that, well, guess what? That whole thing falls
exactly.
apart.
Exactly, exactly. So I think it's just finding the balance. And the more you learn about the psychology of belief, why people believe what they believe. I read a great book by David McCraney, I think his name is, How Minds Change. And it's all about that, psychology of belief. Also, The Righteous Mind by, I can't remember who wrote it.
Jonathan Haidt.
That's a
Yeah.
great book, and so learning about the psychology and how people actually tend to believe things way more with their emotions than with their brains. Like, we use our emotions to get the belief and to cling to it, but then we use our logic to, like, make ourselves feel more confident about it. So it
And it's
really
one
kind of
thing I really don't like about some of those new atheist authors, where when it's all logic all the time, they have very little empathy for how people actually process any of that stuff.
Exactly, exactly. And I think it makes you more open,
Mhm.
to, instead of being like, "Oh, you are a religious mindset, you're wrong," and just kind of closing it off. It's like, "Oh, well, we're all in our own unique path, and some people just believe it. It gives them hope and peace. Maybe we can just kind of work through together to figure out what's most logical, what makes the most amount of sense." It's a
Yeah.
much gentler
Not
approach.
everyone wants a lecture all the
Exactly,
time.
exactly.
So for people who haven't seen this, can you talk about a recent event you had to deal with where you decided to challenge your own congresswoman about stuff? I don't want to give anything away. What led to you getting super politically active? What happened when you tried to confront her about it?
Well, I started getting more politically, more talking more about more politics on my channel and the things we need to do. And I noticed as the presidency was occurring in the first few weeks, things were happening very fast. And so I was like, we got to do something. We need to get out there. We need to be calling our representatives. And I was listing off all these things that we need to be doing. And I'm like, I can't just sit on the internet and talk about it. I see that a lot. We're all just kind of sitting here saying, this is bad. We got to do something. And nobody's doing anything. So to me, I was like, I need to walk the walk. I need to actually model it and tell people about my experience and encourage them and inspire them to do the same thing. So it started with me calling my local representative, Diana Harshbarger, who is a Trump loyalist. And
And
I
what
just
state is this in for people who may not have
this is
heard of
in
her?
Tennessee, District 1, Tennessee. So we're just kind of like up in the corner there, nobody really pays us any mind. And I don't think Diana had a lot of attention before all of this. But I started calling her regularly, calling her office. And the staff would never be able to answer my questions about a variety of issues that I had, I had questions for. And they would just kind of push me off and say, "Oh, well, we'll pass the message along," or "We're not sure. We haven't talked to her about that." And I'd never get a call. I'd never get an email. I was calling every single day, and I was getting increasingly frustrated that I was getting on the internet and saying, "Hey, we got to call our representatives and hold them accountable." But when I call, they're not answering and I'm getting nothing from it. And that made me very frustrated. And so I thought, okay, I need to escalate this. I need to figure out how to get in touch with my congresswoman. And I saw an event on her Facebook page that she had coming up. It was Coffee with Your Congresswoman. And so I decided, you know what? I'm going to go to that. I am going to show up and I'm going to have my questions answered. And I knew that, with the Q&A, it'd be limited time. So I had to pick one thing. And the one issue that I chose was Medicaid, because I know that a lot of people in my area rely on Medicaid. And so I thought that would be a really important issue to bring up. And the fact that right now Congress is trying to pass this budget that, would basically gut Medicaid and quote unquote leave it to the states, which my state doesn't even have funding for that. And they were going to get rid of Medicaid and basically just fund billionaire tax cuts with it. And I wanted to confront her with that information and ask her point blank, is this what you're doing and do you support it? And so I showed up at the town
Which, by the way,
hall.
sounds like a pretty easy question for any
Very.
politician to
Yes,
answer. Just
it
like,
should
no, I
be.
would never do that.
Yes, and so what I did before I went is I actually researched everything about this woman. I read her Wikipedia page. I Googled her name in news and I just read all of her recent interviews in the news and studied the things that she was saying in public. And I saw that she was going around saying that 60% of people on Medicaid aren't eligible to be on it, which is crazy because like half of people on Medicaid are kids. So I thought this was such a wild thing she was saying with no proof at all. And I did the research and found out that it's so far from the truth. So I wrote down the facts. I had this handwritten piece of paper with all of my facts on it. And I was just going to, yeah, I was going to bring it up during the Q&A. And when I got there, I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know if there would be a lot of people there, but um, I showed up. I was the first person there, first person in line. And then I see the line just is like going around the building and the parking lot, and there's protesters outside. It was quite an event, and yeah, it got rowdy.
You found your people. By the way,
Mhm.
one person points out really quick, I really appreciate it, Kristi. I'm also in Tennessee, and you've inspired me to get more politically active. I had
Yay!
planned on checking out for 4 years, so it's working. So that's great.
That is the goal. That is I also planned on checking out for I told my husband before the election, I said, "We are not fighting. We are not doing anything. We're not making noise. We're gonna get a camper van and move out west, and we're just gonna, like, hide." And then the election happened, and I was like, "Oh, no. I'm ready to fight."
Yeah. So you get to this event. There are other people like you there who are pissed
Yes.
off. And what happens when you actually go in there and get to listen to what she's saying?
So we get in and it is packed. Like there isn't an empty seat in the entire place. There was a couple hundred people there, probably. There were people standing in the back, and there were. I think it was split evenly. Half people that were there probably supported her, and half the people didn't. I even think maybe there were more people that didn't support her, but that's just me guessing. I sat right at the front and I had every intention of just keeping my cool, being calm, waiting for my time to ask questions. But I had never been to one of these, so I didn't know how it was going to go. And she started the entire thing with a prayer, like a Christian prayer. And that was really strange. And I didn't like it.
Well, I mean, this
And
was a church service. So, yeah.
Basically, yeah, she thought it was. And so, yeah, she starts with this prayer, and I stayed seated through it with two others beside me. They were also seated. And then after that, she starts the whole meeting by saying, I see lots of protesters, and we're going to set ground rules, and you have to be respectful. Like, almost like we were in kindergarten, I'm going to set the rules for how this is going to go. And I was just sitting there thinking, this is weird. You're a representative. You work for us. How are you gonna get up there and talk about ground rules?" But then she went into this question that it's been viral all over national news, this clip of her saying, "There's been a mandate by the American people to the president. Is there not?" And everybody, the whole room just goes, "No." And she's like, I don't think she was expecting that, at all, but,
Right. Even if Trump won the election and got the votes, that didn't necessarily mean there was a mandate
a
to destroy
mandate.
Medicaid, to get rid of everything, to destroy the
Exactly.
national parks, whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly, and so, yeah, we just, no, she asked again, which was very brave. She's like, "Oh, there's not been a mandate?" And we're all like, "No." And then she goes, "Well, listen, this is the second reddest district in the entire United States. You are God-fearing, freedom-loving patriots." And I spoke up kinda loudly and I said, "Nope, no, I'm not. I am I'm not a God-fearing patriot, sorry." And when I said that, she goes, "Well, you raise your hand if you are," and looked around the room and, some people raised their hand. And that I think it was in that moment I realized, "Oh, this is not gonna go in a nice way. Like, this is not this
You
is gonna
played
be so
by her
different than I thought it
rules.
was gonna be."
At
Yeah.
that point, you realize, oh, we're making the news tonight.
Yes, yes, exactly. I mean, I filmed the entire thing and, other people were filming, but I know that I stuck out like a sore thumb. I was a lot younger than most people there, probably one of the youngest people there. I had big holes in my jeans and I had my camera out, so
The devil horns didn't help. Why
I
did you
was
wear
wearing
that?
red.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I stuck out,
And all
but
you did, to be clear, is say, no, I'm not a God fearing member of your
exactly.
constituency.
Exactly, and, I think in the moment I thought, "Well, maybe I should have just kept quiet," but I was like, I think that's the moment that I realized, "Wait, I am way more in control of this situation, or at least I should be," and I have a right to use my voice. It's literally my right.
She works for
So
you.
exactly. Exactly, like, a lot of people see them as our authority, and, even people in the comments on that video were like, "Oh, well, you should have listened, you should have been respectful," and I'm like, respect is earned, and she is not respecting us. And so, the whole thing, it was an hour and a half. It was very long. And she spent the entire time just lying. She was reading from this binder that, I think was just fed to her from the Trump administration. She didn't even have her own talking points. She was just kind of flipping through it, reading talking points, and the crowd was just giving it to her. And she kept having to, come back at us, be respectful. And I was pretty loud. I was no louder than anybody else, but I was pretty loud. And there were a couple times throughout it that the staff tried to make me leave. At one point, a lady came up and she's like, "You need to get out of here." And I wouldn't, because what are you gonna do? And, she's like, "This is your last chance." And then another staff member walked over and put his hand on my shoulder and said, "This is not an open forum." So they were very much, continuing to come to me and try to, like, get me to be quiet. But what's funny is when they would do that, there would be all these people around me that were yelling out. And so I'd be like, "Are you gonna take them out?" And they would just be like, "You need to be quiet." So I think they just really didn't like it because when I yelled out, I didn't do so to be disruptive. I did so to fact check her. I knew
Mhm.
that she was going to lie. And so every time she lied, I yelled out a fact check. Like when she said, she talked about work requirements for Medicaid and how, "Oh, we just got to get people to work on Medicaid. People aren't working." And I said 64% of people on Medicaid are working, and the rest fall under the exemptions that are allowed.
They can't work.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, and, she didn't, and that's actually when I said that, the staff came over and told me it's not an open forum, and so it wasn't like I wasn't cussing, I wasn't insulting, I wasn't threatening, I was just yelling out facts, basically just fact checking her the entire time, and, they didn't like that, and then, we get to the end, and I think by the end, everybody was just so tired of it. A lot of people had left, because when I got taken out, there were some empty seats there and a lot of protesters outside, so I think people were just sick of it, and they just left, but I was
So
determined.
why did they end up taking you out? Because at some point, too many facts?
Yeah, I don't know. I actually have yet to go to the Sullivan County, Sheriff's Office, but I plan to, I just haven't had the time, but, um, I At the end, it was the last question, and she had not answered anybody's real questions. People had questions about the SAVE Act. I had question about Medicaid, and didn't answer those. And it came to the last question, and the question was about like women and men and women's sports, culture war stuff. And she said biologically you're born a man or a woman, and that's my brain lit up, and I just got up and I said, "No, nope, intersex people exist." And I said it a few times, and then I started asking. I said, "Do intersex people exist?" And she's like, "Ma'am, I'm not going to have this with you. I'm not having this conversation." And I just kept repeating the question over and over again. And I think it was just I was so tired of being lied to. I was sick of the situation, and I was sick of her getting up there and just saying things that weren't true. And I think a lot of people thought that I was trying to engage in a culture war, and to me, it had nothing to do with culture wars, gender identity, anything like that. It was really just, you're lying, and I'm going to correct you and call you out on it.
And if they're doing like a town hall, I mean, I don't care if you call it a coffee or whatever they said, but it is not meant to be a one-way forum of information. It's supposed to be a discussion. And if one person is lying the whole time, we can't have a conversation about that stuff.
Exactly. And it's so strange. I really do think she showed up thinking she was just going to tell us how it was, because she said, "I came here to inform you, and you have to listen to me." She literally said that, "You have to listen to me." And so in her mind, she was there to tell us how things were going to go and what was going on, and give us the facts. But none of it was factual. It was all, I mean, I had researched all of this prior. I knew that she was lying. So it's crazy that she thought that she could show up and do that. I assumed she was showing up and we were all just going to ask questions the whole time. But she only gave us about maybe 20 minutes or so for questions before she shut it all down.
And so they took you out of there.
They
And
did.
I'm kind of curious, given your background as someone who was raised Southern Baptist and maybe taught, hey, women are supposed to keep silent in the church. I'm wondering what you think of yourself turning into this person who is like going from mindful and demure to someone who is getting kicked out of a town hall meeting for challenging a Republican for lying to you. That seems like a really awesome, inspiring shift.
It's a big shift. I've had, a lot of personal shifts in the last 6 months or so, and so that probably has a lot to do with it. And it's funny because I have been preaching calmness on my channel for a long time. Calmness, unity, we have to be calm and not reactive. But in that situation, and I've clarified this on my channel, I think we do need to be calm about our information. We need to try to have good conversation, productive conversations with our fellow Americans. But I mean, I truly believe we are experiencing an extremely hostile government takeover. And I'm not ready to play nice with those that are participating and perpetuating it and supporting it. And Diana is. And so I
I mean, one
yeah,
thing that's amazing to me is I hope more people do that in Republican districts if their representatives are brave enough to even show their faces in public. What they need to be met with is that sort of pushback. And I
yes.
hope that if you are raising your voice and saying, you're lying to us, here's what the facts are, I would hope everyone around you is backing you up on that as well and not letting you take the hit for what everyone is thinking anyway.
Yeah, we live, I mean, I think just our culture and our society is very much, they've kind of primed us to be calm and nice and respectful in the face of absolute oppression. And I just don't think that's right. And it's taken a lot for me to kind of step out of, oh, well, what are people going to think of me? And is this the right thing? Am I reacting wrong? And then step into, I know that this is wrong. I know this in my heart that what they're doing is not right. And I have to stand up for it. And I have to use my voice. And it might take me getting loud. And after I left, on the way home, actually, the police, they pulled me out. I wouldn't get up out of my seat because I just didn't know how to react. I didn't even know if they could kick me out. And so when they grabbed me and pulled me out, I went to the parking lot and I kind of panicked for a minute because I've never had that happen before. And I got a lot of support from people outside. And then on the drive home, I just felt very, I almost felt like I did something wrong. Like I was kind of racking my brain. I'm like, did I do something wrong? Did I make a mistake? Did I
I wonder
embarrass myself?
I wonder how much of that is religious, the pushing back against authority, and you should feel guilty about doing that. How dare you?
I think so. I think, I always it's hard to overcome those. I feel like deconstruction is a lifelong battle, so you're always going to have those little things inside those little parts of you that kind of speak up and they're like, "Hey, wait a minute, you're not supposed to do this." And I didn't know how my audience would react. When I posted it, I was very hesitant. I was like, I don't know. What if I post this and everybody is like, "You're crazy. Why did you do that?"
There are ways to
And
challenge your congresswoman, and this
right,
ain't it.
respectfully, right, exactly, and so I really didn't know what to expect, and then I posted it and it, like, popped off, and,
Because I
every
think people want to see anyone pushing back. And what's surprising
exactly,
to me, not just you, but I don't know why more elected Democrats are not pushing back as hard as you are, because they have protections that you don't necessarily have and a
yes,
platform that you don't necessarily have. But that's the thing. Like when AOC or whoever it is pushes back against that stuff, I don't get why, even politically, strategically, don't people see that this is good branding? This is good for your political future, pushing back in the best possible way. Um, it just strikes me. I'm glad to see more Democrats saying, hey, you know what? If too many Republicans are not holding any more town halls because they don't want what happened to Diana to happen to them, they don't want to be confronted by their constituents. Fine. Democrats should start having meetings in their
mhm.
districts and saying, all right, they won't talk to you, but we will. And we'll tell you why the person you voted for is horrible. Like, that just sounds smart to me. I don't get why people are, especially when you're in the business of politics, why people are hesitant to push back like that.
Yeah, I struggle with it a lot because, when it's one person that's just screaming in the corner, they look like a crazy person. When it's a whole mob of people, doing it, that is democracy. That is us using our collective voice to, r you know, uh, petition the government for redress of grievances, and so my goal has been to practice what I preach, to walk the walk, and to get out there and fight the fight, and no matter what that costs. And I was hoping, I'm still hoping that by doing so, I will inspire other people to do the same thing because we need everyday average people getting out there and making some noise and getting rowdy and putting the heat and the pressure on our representatives. And I'm very conflicted with my thoughts on Democratic representatives. I think on one hand, they are just failing miserably. They're not fighting enough for us. But on the other hand, I also know that a lot of Americans are also not fighting. And it is our duty and our responsibility as citizens to preserve our future. It's supposed to be a type of democracy. It's supposed to be in our hands. And a lot of people just don't feel like they have power. So they don't use their voice. They think a protest is pointless. They think calling their representatives is pointless. And I'm a very determined person. So when I say you need to call your representatives, and people say it's pointless, and then I call my representative and she doesn't answer, or I don't get a call back, I'm like, okay, I have to do something. I've got to make this work. I've got to get creative or whatever. So I just was hoping to like inspire more people. And it's really hard to get people to participate in protest, in anything that looks or appears to be not socially acceptable, not nice or respectful enough. And there's a lot of things that you can do to put the heat on them that would work, but we need enough people to do that. I would love to get a giant protest of hundreds of people in my town to march up to Diana's office and say, we demand you to come out and talk to us. Recently, we had a protest in my town. There was about 30 of us, and they called ahead of time to make appointments with the staff so that we could all go in groups and talk to them. We showed up for the protest. They locked the doors and told us that we had no appointment and that they wouldn't be letting us in because it was a safety concern. So they are getting scared, but we need numbers. We need more people. And I think that if we had more American citizens just stepping outside of their comfort zone and doing a little bit more, or maybe doing a lot more, that our representatives would feel like they have the backing of the American people. But there's only so much they can do on their own. It's like, yeah, they can get up and they can shout and yell, or they might, and they might all get imprisoned by the administration, and then we don't have representatives. So they need us behind them, and they need us putting the heat on the Republican representatives. They need us supporting our Democratic representatives, and actually showing that the American people have a problem with this. And I just don't think enough people have woken up yet to how bad things are and could get in the future.
I feel like that is slowly starting to happen where
It
more
is, yeah.
people are more willing to protest, push back in any way. But even if people are unable to protest in person or they're scared of doing it, I hope the one takeaway is everyone has some power here. If you can't
Everyone.
show up in person, you can
Mhm.
support candidates who are doing that work. You can donate money, you can donate time. You can write postcards for the local elections. You can run for office. I mean, there's so many ways to push back in some way.
Yep.
And I mean, I've seen a lot more people doing it locally as well, which is exciting to see.
Mhm.
Not to totally change the subject on this, but one of the videos you made recently that has nothing to do with politics, really, was one saying there are ways that non-religious people and Christians can work together to promote a sense of unity. And you said the reaction you got to that was actually kind of surprising. Can you talk about
Yeah.
that?
Well, every time I post about unity, my audience tends to drop off a little bit. That happened. It happened probably about, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 months ago, something like that. I posted a video about tolerating. Because somebody had asked me, should we tolerate these bad beliefs? And even if they're not hurting someone, they're still believing something, and that's wrong. Should we tolerate that, or should we try to change it? So I kind of made a video that was a little bit of a different tone, because I have kind of shifted a lot in how I see things. I no longer have this desire to like make everybody, question their religion and walk away from it, eradicate, these beliefs, because I don't think it's productive. I think it's more productive to recognize that atheists or non-believers will always exist, Christians will always exist. And so if we want a better future, we have to figure out how to work together. Like, it's really our only option. And people didn't really like that either. They A lot of people, especially who are still walking away, kind of tied up in the trauma and haven't done a lot of healing work, can be very reactive to that and very defensive, and rightfully so. I was like that for a long time too, where I was like, no, these people hold beliefs that hurt people and marginalize people, and
Right.
we need to call it out. But I have a much more nuanced, open view these days, where I recognize that even the psychology of belief is very complex. So it's really more about like just being smarter, more productive, more creative, and how you navigate these issues. But when I posted that, and I actually thought that it would get a really good response. It's always the opposite of what I think, but I really didn't expect it to get so much pushback. But I realized that people, and I am too, are seeing this rise of Christian nationalism and how it has just gripped our administration. And they're like, no, this is the enemy. And though I think that it can be in a lot of spaces, I also recognize that the Christian church has a history of standing up for the separation of church and state. They have a history of fighting for civil rights. They're not the whole church, but there are,
Right.
denominations. There are, in history, the church hasn't always been one singular oppressive force.
Right.
There are all kinds of denominations and churches, and they exist on a spectrum. And so what I hope to do is to tap into those places where they're not so Christian nationalist, but they're people who just have good hearts, a good community. They go to church because they like it and it makes them feel nice. They probably don't read the Bible that much or even know half of what's in it. And I'm not going to go
Hey,
tell
just like
them,
the devout.
yeah, yeah, and I'm not gonna go tell them like, "Hey, stop being Christian and wake up."
Right.
I'm just gonna say, "Hey, are do you want freedom? Do you want a good future? Can we find a way to work together? And do you think it's wrong what they're doing? Can we maybe find some common shared values of freedom, democracy, life, liberty, happiness, the most basic things, and work toward that?" And we don't have to agree on everything else at the end,
Right.
but this is a thing where I think we need as many people in the resistance as possible, and alienating half the country, or however many people are Christians, is probably not the way to go. And it sucks, and a lot of people don't want to hear that because they're like, that's my enemy. But I'm not trying to think of like what's nice or righteous. I'm just trying to think of what is productive. How are we going to get the numbers we need? The churches already have their history, they have the community, they have the infrastructure, and they have their values, right? They have their love your neighbor, welcome the immigrant values. Let's tap into that and get them to remember what they stand for, because I believe that if they do and they have a realistic idea of what's happening all around them and in the world, that we could come together and we could fight this.
In
Um,
some ways, there is this enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of thing. But
yeah.
one thing, I've talked about this a little bit on my channel, but one of the things I've noticed over the past 10, 20 years is it used to be if atheists were fighting church state separation lawsuits, the handful of groups that do that sort of thing, they would kind of be on their own because no one wants to work with them. They're pariahs in
Mhm.
that sense. And what has changed is because Christian nationalism doesn't just threaten atheists, it threatens non-Christians, it threatens Christians who are not the right type of Christians.
Yep.
There's actually a lot more collaboration, like literally on
Mhm.
lawsuits. Who are the plaintiffs challenging the government when it comes to some of these things? When it comes to abortion rights and things like that, it's never just the church state separation crowd, it's the church state separation crowd and the Jews who are
Mhm.
pro-choice, and the Hindus and the Sikhs and the Christian pro-choice community, or whoever it is.
Mhm.
And they say, like, who are the plaintiffs for these cases? Yes, there might be an atheist parent who says, I don't want religion in my school, but there's also a pastor who says, I don't believe the school is the place to have my religion taught to children. And it's
Mhm.
those collaborations that show, look, we disagree on a lot of stuff when we're having beers over drinks, when we're having drinks later on. But on this issue, we are all united. And that stuff makes a difference. And this is maybe the hard thing when you're progressive, which is we have such a big tent that there is such a wide array of opinions on so many things.
Mhm.
And I feel like you have a much more homogenous group on the right who are willing to go along with whatever people say. And it's a lot harder to bring people together when you're under this big tent. I mean, I think AOC has said this before. In any other country, someone like her, someone like Joe Biden, some of the other Democrats would be in completely different parties. In the
Mhm.
US, they're all lumped together, whereas
One
the
umbrella.
Republicans are almost one and the same, which is why they don't push back against their own party.
Yes. Yeah, I almost think it's like a strength and a weakness simultaneously, that the left is better about eating their own than the right is, because because, I think, and, I'll probably alienate anybody on the right for this, but, I think that the left, those that I know on the left tend to have a lot more integrity for their values, and that integrity for your values can make you very angry when other people aren't having integrity for their values. And I see a lot on the right that just kind of go along with whatever is going on the right, and they don't consider how it aligns with their values. They just go with it, just to speak generally. But so I think it's a strength and a weakness. We should be careful not to fall in the trap of, oh, this is what the Democrat says. This is blue, so this is what I believe. And actually be willing to think and form our own opinions outside of that. But at the same time, I do think that I think that many on the right, or maybe not on the right, but many in the center, that are kind of sick of both sides, I think they have a little bit of a point when they talk about the kind of weaponization of values and empathy that you see on the left. Not, I don't think quite as badly as on the right, but I think both sides tend to have their opinions, and they get mad when others don't hold their values. And the left tends to really not like it when people don't hold all their values. And so, if you're not an enemy of what they're an enemy of, well, then you are just going to be written off.
Yeah.
So
I mean, more
it's
than anything, I think people appreciate when anyone just says, these are my values. I'm not compromising on the following
Mhm.
things. And just admit, look, I don't like working with this person because we
Yeah.
disagree on this. However, there's a bigger enemy to fight, and we can hash out other stuff later. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that is the position we're in, where we don't have the luxury of being able to debate some of the smaller things because there are
Mhm.
existential crises.
Yeah,
facing
it's
so
a
many of
very pressing matter, like, things are happening quick, so we have to, like, move quick, and we don't have time to sit here and, like, sort out all these even things like abortion, like, I don't even think nobody's even really talking about abortion right now. It's like these most basic human values of,
The question
what
is not which week are we going to
Yeah,
ban it. It's no
yeah,
one gets it at all, and that's the
mhm,
only option on the table, so you gotta
yep.
push back against that. I
Yeah, we
mean,
all just have to kinda come together and figure out how to move forward together even if we, are different on a lot of other
yeah.
issues.
It's the one thing Republicans and Democrats have in common, which is they all hate Democrats,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, pretty much,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, we have a few minutes left, and I did wanna ask you about a subject that you
Okay.
you probably have some experience with, which is being a female atheist on YouTube, and I'm just
Mm.
wondering, for the people who may not be aware, uh, have you found that to be an issue in terms of how people respond to you in comments? One thing I have wondered for a long time is how do we get more women? How do we get more people of color to be active on social media sites when it comes to talking about these issues from a non theistic perspective, whatever version of that they want to talk about? But it's always been hard. And obviously, the more famous atheists historically are those white male academics. And I'm not even,
Mhm.
they don't control that. That's who they are. That's fine. But how do we get other people involved? And I'm wondering what your experience has been like. Maybe you have heard from people who are curious about it because um, they don't see more people like you online talking about these issues.
Yeah, oh, man.
By the way,
I
you
always
now represent all women
Yeah,
and
barely,
all.
yeah, I
Yeah.
know. No, I think that I always knew that I would get a lot of pushback. I was used to it on TikTok. I got a lot of bad comments, mean comments, and, they tend to be very sexist in nature. And actually, my channel name, Jezebel Vibes, and that's my kind of been my branding since TikTok. That came from a comment from someone who told me I had Jezebel vibes on TikTok. And so, they
Was
love
that a
to kind of
compliment or an insult?
no, no, it was an insult.
Okay.
It's like, "Oh, you've got the Jezebel spirit," "Oh, she's manipulative," and I don't know, but I just thought it was so funny that I adopted it. But I always kind of assumed that I got the normal amount of pushback, for what I was doing, and that it was just kind of the way things went. But I remember I had a talk with Brandon from the Mind Shift channel, and he had brought up in that interview that he felt like my comment section was a lot harsher than his. And then he felt like I got a lot more, I had a lot more videos that are made about me. If you look at my name, there are just endless white male apologists that are making videos and put with an arrow pointed about how stupid I am. And so that's very common.
Congratulations for being the star of a lot of YouTube thumbnails.
I
That's
am.
great.
There are some of them that their entire channel is dedicated to me, and it's just like this obsessive, strange male thing. I don't know. I don't usually really talk too much about like my place as a woman in this, but I do know that it probably is a very different experience than a lot of men. And I think naturally, not even just in religion, but in our society, women are just, we're inclined to think women are not as smart, not as capable, not as confident. And so I tend to be underestimated, but I always say it's my superpower that I'm underestimated because I always end up proving people wrong. So I kind of like being underestimated, but I do feel that it takes a toll sometimes. A lot of negative comments, a lot of people who just assume that I know absolutely nothing what I'm talking about, and that just want to school me. And, people use a lot of sexist language. I have gotten some really violent, graphic threats through my emails from some people. And that happens. But I think that probably is a lot of the reason that you don't see more women, more people of color that are getting on here and doing this because it's taxing on your emotional state sometimes.
It can be. One last question for you, which is in general, what advice do you have for people who have opinions on these things, whether it's religion or politics, and who may be new to all of it, whatever social media platform they're using? Do you have any advice for people on how to get started, what they may want to keep in mind that you wish someone had told you when you got started?
Um, Well, I guess just speaking from personal experience, I have always wanted to show up authentically. I wanted to be genuine and not worry so much about algorithms and reach and all of that. I rarely ever look at my analytics, maybe once a month or so. I just really believe that if you want to do this because you are passionate about something and you have a voice and you want to use it, then you should just do that. And the more I have just showed up as myself instead of trying to show up as what people want to hear, even if I know it might be polarizing or I might lose subscribers. I've learned, especially since leaving Christianity, having always been told that my heart is deceitful and wrong and wicked and I can't trust it. I have learned the opposite is true, that listening to myself, trusting my intuition, which is my natural biological given thing to guide me through life, that has gotten me so much further than trying to show up and be something that other people want. And so I think, I mean, anybody in this space, I would say, unless you're trying to make like, the richest YouTube channel or something, that worry a lot less about what other people want to hear and just share your heart. And then also just be willing to be wrong, be willing to change your mind and be flexible and just be a human being that doesn't have to, sit on a standard of perfection.
I have found that as well. I cannot think of a single person who has thought about jumping into the fray and talking about this stuff, whatever the social media site is, who has come to regret it, only in the
Mhm.
sense that they have heard feedback from people who said, "Hey, I stumbled across the video you made or the post you made about this and it resonated." And
Mhm.
even for all the downsides of being public or doing this, talking about polarizing topics, there are people who find value in it. And a
Yeah.
couple last comments here. Kristi is my inspiration for starting my American Atheist chapter and protests in East Tennessee.
Yay, I
Very
love
nice.
that.
Another commenter points out there your recent shift from talking purely about apologetics to talking about more political and Christian nationalistic type of stuff is welcome as well. They subscribed to you after you made that shift.
Love
And
it.
one other comment here, you're a unique and needed voice. Thank you so much.
Aw, thank you. That's
Very
very, very
kind
kind.
comments all around. I want to thank you for giving me some of your time here. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you, find your YouTube channel, and anything else you're working on?
You can find me on YouTube. You can search Jezebel Vibes. Used to be able to search Kristi Burke, but you'll find me a lot easier if you just search Jezebel Vibes. But if you search Kristi Burke, you just might find other people making videos about me. But I'm also on Blue Sky. I'm not on any other socials, but yeah, I'm on Blue Sky. You can look me up there, Kristi Burke. Very easy.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I hope everyone
Great.
subscribes to Christie's channel right now. It's such a joy to talk to you, and I look forward to doing it again in the future.
Thank you so much. This was an honor.
All right. I'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody. Thank you for watching.